Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the webinar on 10 steps to ISO 22301 certification. So without further ado, let's jump into this. Okay, a little bit about CertiKit for those that don't know us. We're a leading creator of compliance toolkits and providers of ISO services, and we're based in Derbyshire, which is in central UK. Since 2010, we have helped more than 4,000 customers globally achieve compliance. We specialize in ISO standards and data protection compliance standards. And our mission is to make compliance as easy as possible so organizations can achieve certifications too, and then benefit from their chosen standard or data protection regulations. A little bit about me. I'm Ted. I'm one of the two consultants. You just heard the voice of my colleague, Jerry, who will be riding shotgun for this. I'm the main consultant for the ISO management systems that include 9, 14, 45, and 22301. And I assist in creating and helping document new updates to these standards and any help that current CertiKit customers need on those standards and our toolkits. I'm also the technical author, and as I said, I assist in the development of the toolkit. I am a certified 9, 14, 45, and 22 lead auditor, and also information security management system lead auditor. I'm a certified integrated management system implementer, and for my sins, I'm a black belt Lean Six Sigma practitioner, which helps when we document processes. So what are we going to cover today? Well, we're going to look at 10 steps. The first step is project implementation. We'll look at scope, context, and interested parties. We'll talk about the BCMS policy and roles and responsibilities that go within the BCMS. We'll have a look at BCMS risks, opportunities, and the BCMS objectives. We'll talk about BCMS support, which includes documentation, which is the next step. We'll then look at the operational side of the BCMS, which includes your business impact assessment, your strategies and solutions document, your business plans, business continuity plans, disruption plans, incident response plans. We'll look at how you do your performance review. We'll look at the last step before looking at certification, which is looking back over what you've done to make sure everything's there. And then finally, we'll talk about how you plan your certification needs. So now we're going to look at each one of these steps in a little bit more depth. So first one is, why work towards implementation? Well, nobody knows what the future holds, and uncertainty is obviously a part of business life. However, as a good scout, you can be prepared to identify potential threats to your business, and by implementing and therefore embedding a business continuity system, you help mitigate or reduce those effects. It allows you to enhance resilience and preparedness of your management systems and process. And the 22301 standard actually provides a structured approach to help you identify potential disruptions. It helps you in understanding the risks and the vulnerabilities of your organization might face. And by identifying those risks, you can then proactively develop the strategies and business continuity plans and disruption plans to mitigate those risks, and also to have things in place should those risks occur. It also helps reduce downtime and financial losses. Obviously, if something happens and you've got a plan in place, you can reduce the amount of downtime and therefore reduce the amount of financial hit you're going to take. It keeps you compliant and also gives you a competitive advantage. Many companies that actually go for certification and have that stamp on their website or on their documents or advertise it in some way, identify themselves as somebody who takes their business and the business that they're providing to their customers seriously. And that is a competitive advantage in all markets. It improves stakeholder confidence. Customers, suppliers, and other stakeholders are more likely to trust and engage with an organization that has demonstrated a commitment to business continuity. Again, this is what the badge is all about. It's showing your commitment. ISO22301 certification provides tangible evidence to your dedication to ensuring that your business can weather unexpected events and continue to deliver value to the important people, the clients. It helps you streamline your processes and increases your efficiency. As you implement 22301, it encourages you to assess and refine your business continuity plans and your business continuity processes. This generally leads to increased efficiency and effectiveness in day-to-day operations. It helps you to hone into those areas and those interdependencies between processes that could have an impact should something happen. And by identifying those and mitigating those, you greatly increase your resilience against disruptions. The next part of it, implementation, is getting management buy-in. This is super important. It's something both myself and Jerry harp onto when we talk to our clients. If you don't get the backing of your senior executives, how are you going to get the resources, the support to push this project through? If staff don't see that the senior management are buying into it, why should they buy into it? It's got to be led from the top. Clause 5 of this standard, in fact, Clause 5, all the management standards the ISO produce, states clearly that it is the executive management that is responsible to support, resource, to ensure the efficiency and the effectiveness of that management system. And it's no different in 22301. Stakeholders could lose commitment to support it if they don't see senior management endorsing it. And to be honest, if you are one of the people who are implementing this management system within your organization, without that support, you are going to find it difficult to complete tasks, to get resources, whether that is time, whether it's money, or somebody else's support within the business to help you do that. If you don't get that clout from the top, it's going to make life a lot more difficult. Then you need to develop a project plan. No organization in their right mind would enter into a development of a product or a service without a plan. So why would you implement a management system without a plan? A plan helps you to ensure that everybody who is involved within that implementation knows what tasks they are responsible for and what order they're in, and therefore what tasks need to be completed in what order. You can use your task as an aid as you go through implementation to look back at it and say, right, have we done that? Have we done that? Have we done that? As a check. It's really important. I'll be honest with you, implementation of a management system, and I'm sure Jerry will back me up on this, you can have a plan that details the nth extent, but as you go through implementation, things come up. We call it work, where your work life interferes with your implementation, and it happens in every implementation I've ever done. So your plan has to be flexible. You've got to have an ability to be able to change it as and when work commitments turn up. This is especially important in small, medium-sized companies where you can't just drop a project that comes in to keep your implementation going. But you should have some form of leeway within your plan to allow for that and allow for you to quickly go back over what you've done and then pick it up and then move forward. Depending on the size of your organization, you may want to have a steering group. Larger organizations, these groups should be made up of key decision makers. You need to have a C-level person in there. That's your conduit up to the CEO, the MD, the president to get those resources allocated. Also, key members are within BCMS. Obviously, the BCMS owner could be a manager. Your IT definitely need to be sat at that table. Probably facilities need a seat at that table. And anybody else that falls under the scope of that management system. Your BCMS, as we'll talk about in a minute, does not necessarily have to cover the whole of the organization. It could be in areas of the organization. So the more the scope, the bigger the scope, probably the more people you're going to have sat or a representative sat at this steering group. Smaller businesses, obviously, you're not going to have a lot of people, and therefore you may not want to have a steering group, but you may want to have more steering meetings within the people that are implementing this management system. And they're responsible for the decisions on policies, procedures, resourcing, supporting, etc., etc., etc. Then you need to communicate to the business what you're doing. If you're implementing this and nobody knows what you're doing, you're going to come up with some resistance. Change is a fickle thing, and you're going to have people in your business who are pretty averse to change. The people who have said, we've done this for the last 20 years, I'm not going to change it now. That type of person. You need to get them on board. This is not a journey from the senior management and you guys implementing this. This is a journey for the whole of the business. And by bringing the message down to the people at the bottom end, from top to bottom, you get their buy-in. So it's important to let them know what's happening. It's important to plant the seeds of how it's going to benefit them in the future. Let those seeds grow, therefore they will buy into it more. Don't come in with a big broom and say, right, all change, this is what we're going to do in future. You got to do this, you got to do that. All you'll get is brick walls, and it'll just be torture trying to get this implemented. So early communication, early awareness, early buy-in, not just from senior management, but from everybody, will help make this implementation go easy. Trust me, from my experience, it pays dividends by doing this properly at the right at the beginning. Also, when you're talking and bringing this awareness to everybody else, let them know that you've got management buy-in. Let them know that you've got the support of the top people. It will help you sell the plan. Once you've done all that, you're ready to perform an initial gap assessment. A gap assessment, you may turn around and say, well, we haven't got anything. We haven't got a management plan. We haven't got business continuity. You may actually surprise yourself when you do a gap assessment, what you have got. This is going to help reduce the amount of time that it takes to implement. And it also helps you refine your project plan. Because if you've already got things in place, you may have contingency plans for a fire outbreak where you've got to evacuate the building. You've got a plan for that. Well, there's a business continuity plan. You've already got that. You may have one for power outages, for backups. All of these are backup plans. All of these are business continuity plans. All of these are documentation that you probably got that you won't need to reproduce. So performing an initial gap assessment helps you identify what you have got and what you haven't got. And by doing that, you can then go back to your project plan and refine those steps to say, well, we've got that. We don't need to include that now. We haven't got that. We've got to do that. We've got some of that, so we need to concentrate a bit on that. So your gap assessment is an important step for the whole of the project. Step 2 in the 10 steps is scope and interested parties. As I said to you just a few minutes ago, the scope of your BCMS does not necessarily have to cover the whole of your business. It may be in critical areas of your business, depending on what you do, what type of organization you are. So you need to think about the boundaries of the scope, not just physical, because you may be a single unit where you've got one office, or you may be multiple offices or a factory and offices separate. You've got to think, where is my business continuity going to sit? Is it going to sit just in the executive offices? Is it going to sit in the factory? Is it going to sit just in the IT department and factory? Decide what the scope is and the physical boundaries of that scope are. Look at the critical activities and the internal external processes for your products and your services that you deliver. What is going to be in scope? Why are you putting a BCMS in place in the first place? Is to make sure your critical processes and your critical services and products aren't disrupted. Therefore, you keep supporting the client. So you need to identify them. So you've got to think about that within your scope. Think about your interfaces, not just with your processes, but with your business units. Do you need to have HR within scope? Probably not. There is a part within the management system that they come into, but do they have to be covered by a business continuity plan? Probably not. What about finance? Maybe finance, because if things go wrong, finance has still got to get invoices out to get money back in, to get things out. So they may be covered. Sales, do they have to be covered? Probably, possibly not. Maybe they can just get on with things. These are the things you've got to ask yourself as you look at the business units around your BCMS. What interdependencies here? If sales are okay, are they going to be able to supply finance with the requirements that they need to invoice people? That sort of thing. So you need to define what needs to be in your scope. You also need to think about your interested parties. Now, interested parties fall under three categories. Now, they can be either people or institutes or entities that can be affected directly by your BCMS, or they can be perceived to be impacted by your BCMS. And finally, they can impact your BCMS. So you've got to identify who can be affected by, think that they can be affected by, or can affect your business continuity plan, management system, sorry. Generally, obviously, your customers are going to be one of the top ones. They can definitely be impacted or perceived to be impacted, because if you've got a problem, they're going to be starting thinking, well, hang on a sec, what about my products they're supposed to be shipping to me? What about the services supposed to be delivering to me? So they have a vested interest in your business continuity management system. Your employees internally are one of your top interested parties. They want to know what's in place should this fall over. What do I have to do if this happens? Suppliers, another interested party with a major vested interest in your business continuity. But this works both ways. If you have cloud suppliers where you're using your applications, so you have your processes and that on cloud services, you should be interested in their business continuity. What happens if one of their services go down that you want or you're using? How is that going to affect your business? Have they got something in place? You need to identify from them what they've got to do and then apply that to your business continuity management system process to say, well, it's going to take them an hour and a half to get that fixed according to their BCP. So a minimum for us for our manageable time, downtime, is at least an hour and a half. Then we got to think, how long, once we get it back, will it take us to reconfigure what we're doing and input the data that we've lost? That gives us our expected downtime with their time. So an interested party is definitely one of your suppliers, and more importantly, especially cloud suppliers. But if you're a manufacturer and you have a problem with your manufacturing plant, or your supplier to your manufacturing plant has a problem, that affects you as well. So interested parties, you really need to think carefully about this, about how they can be affected by or can affect you, and understand what they need and what their requirements are and what your needs and requirements are from them. This is also important later on when you go further down into the management system on clause 6. You have to identify the risks and opportunities from these needs and requirements of your interested parties. So doing the job properly at this stage saves a lot of time further on down. And then you have to document all of that information. It's a requirement, the standard, an auditor, when they come in for your certification, if you go that far, will come down and ask you, have you got documentation for your interested parties? Can you show me their needs and requirements? Can you show me how you mitigate or collect that information and provide that requirement? So documentation is important. Step 3, policy plus roles and responsibilities. Within the standard, a strong emphasis is placed upon responsibility of senior management, which is why I harped on about it when we talked about senior management buy-in. An auditor will expect to see active involvement from senior management, not just during implementation, but throughout the lifetime of the business continuity management system. A lot of managers think, senior managers think that once we've got the certificate, that's it. Halas, we don't have to do anything more. Unfortunately, it's not, because an auditor will check on your surveillance audits and your recertifications that management are still supporting and delivering their support to the management system. One important aspect of this involvement is to establish a document business continuity policy. You must have a BC policy, and it has to be aligned to the business strategic directions and also reflect that the BCMS is integrated within the organization's processes and interdependencies, and it is supported and adequately resourced by the senior management. All of that has to be in a policy document, and it has to be documented. It is a requirement. You will be audited against it. There are several stipulations inside the standard that say what is required within the policy, and some of them they've got to be appropriate for the purpose of the business. Has to provide a framework for setting business continuity objectives. It has to include commitments to satisfy applicable requirements and continual improvement. It must be communicated within the business, and it must be available to those identified interested parties as appropriate. So it's a document that you have to have. It's got to be complete. It has to be in a fit state, and it has to be available. For any business continuity management system to be viable, you've got to have the right people in it to run it. Therefore, you've got to identify the roles, responsibilities of those individuals within the organization who are going to be involved within the operation of the BCMS. So these staff members will be responsible to ensure that the BCMS conforms to the requirements of the standard, and they will report on the performance of the BCMS to senior management during the management reviews. They're also there for the day-to-day running. Now, most business continuity management systems are secondary jobs to people within the business, within the organization. So they've got their day job, but they'll also have a role. If you think for IT, you're going to have an IT manager. His day-to-day job is to run the IT department, but he has a role within business continuity should there be a disruption or an incident with one of the IT systems. So therefore, he has a BCMS role. So you have to identify all of these people to show where they are within the management system, what their role within that management system is, their responsibilities within that management system, and the authorities they have within that role. The very small organogram on the right-hand side is just an example where we got our executive sponsor as the COO. We have a BC manager, and under him we have department managers, a BC coordinator, and an IRT, incident response team leader. Under the CEO, again, we have an IT manager, and beneath him he has IT technicians. And in this case, we have a cyber team leader and cyber specialists. But for each different organization, you'll have a slightly different responsibility organogram. They have to be identified, they have to be defined, and they have to be documented. One way of doing this is looking at a BCMS responsibility matrix. And that we find this really useful is to identify what the roles are and what the responsibilities are. So across the top, we've got steering group, BC manager, IRT leader, unit risk owner, and BC auditor. And you can have the rest of your ones across the top there. And then down the side is where they would have a responsibility, accountability, either the consulted or informed, relevant to their positions. Takes a little bit of thinking out, and depending on the size of your organization, it can get a little bit convoluted, but it is time well spent if you get this in place at the right time. Step 4, risk, opportunities, and objectives. So there's a number of sub-steps inside of this, but the business will need to identify which risks and opportunities need to be addressed to ensure that the BCMS can provide assurance to achieve its intended outcomes, that can mitigate or reduce those potential undesired effects, and to achieve continual improvement of the business continuity management system. So in order to do that, you have to define or establish the risk appetite and risk processes and your approach to risk. If you've already got 27,001, you'll understand about risk. If you've got 45,001, you'll have a good idea about risk in the way of hazards. If you're doing environmental, you'll understand risk in the case of environmental aspects. This is looking at risks as a business as a whole, not as a secluded environmental business, health and safety or information security. As a whole, all those three actually come inside of this. So if you've got those, they would also feed into this when you're looking at your risk. Risk appetite is a key decision, and it will ultimately determine how you're going to approach and deal with risks that you identify. So, for example, if you're risk averse, then you may want to take action and treat the majority of your risks that you've identified. Alternatively, if you're not too cautious and you don't mind a bit of risk, you'll look at risk and maybe look at the higher risks ones first of all and put things in place rather than the lower risks. So this is a crucial decision that you've got to make early on, how you're going to react to your risks, at what level are you going to do risks. And to do that, you also need then to understand what are your level criteria. What's a low level risk? What's the criteria for that? What's a medium level risk criteria? And what's a high level risk criteria? You've got to decide on those so you can then decide, yeah, we're quite happy with a little bit of risk. So we're going to concentrate on the high risk and some of the higher medium risks for this exercise. So once you've identified your organizing risk appetite and you've documented that, you need to start looking at your interested parties and their associated risks and opportunities. So I said when we were talking about interested parties 10, 15 minutes ago, if you do it right properly and you've identified their needs and requirements and how you're going to meet those needs and requirements, this exercise is where you have to ask yourself, well, what happens if we don't meet those needs and requirements? What's the consequences of that? The consequences are risks, and you have to identify those risks and again categorize them as high, medium, low, and apply those to the same process as you did for your business continuity risks. The flip coin of this is opportunities. What happens, and this is the other question you ask yourself, what happens if we do meet those needs and requirements? And in fact, we meet them really well. What happens there? Well, obviously, there may be opportunities that come out of it. You may be able to leverage more market footprint. You may be able to increase your business through word of mouth or better advertising. There's a risk and opportunity for each interested party. Now, I'll be honest, there's always a risk. Opportunities are hard to define, but they're there if you look for them. An auditor will be expecting you to have identified the risks and identified opportunities for your interested parties when you come to doing your excuse me, certification. All of this, I'm sorry to say, must be documented. Should you go down the line of procuring one of our toolkits, all of these have got templates ready to go. There's spreadsheets for risk and opportunities and for objectives and things like that to make it easier for you to record this. Or you just produce a document or a spreadsheet yourself that captures this data. But it has to be documented as evidence that an auditor can see that you've actually done what you said you're doing. And then you've got to think about objectives. Now, this is something that both myself and Jerry see a lot, is that people confuse management system objectives with business objectives. And although they're aligned, they are not business objectives. They are there to help you improve your management system. And by improving your management system, hopefully it's going to improve your business. Your objectives should be in line, like I said, should be aligned with your business continuity policy, because within the policy, you put the framework for your objectives, so they should be aligned with that. They should be SMART, so they should be specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and more importantly, time-bound. Once you've established your objectives, they need to be communicated within the businesses and to those interested parties as required to let them know that they exist, that they're happening. And probably one of the more important things is that they have to be monitored and updated or tweaked and amended as necessary. The reason I say that is because what I've seen in the past, and I've been doing this for lots of years, is that when they start implementing the management system, not just BCMS, but any management system, they put their first 3 or 4 management objectives in, and then they don't look at it until they come to their first certification surveillance audit. And what's happened? Nobody's monitored it. Nobody's taken care of it. Nobody's checked to see if they're actually doing anything, moving towards the goal of the objective. And what happens there is that the auditor gives you a big non-conformity. So when you plan for your objectives, you have to document this, including how you're going to measure it, when you're going to measure it, what you expect to get from that measurement, and who is responsible for that to be done. So your objectives are for the improvement of the business continuity management system. For a new management system, we recommend maximum of 5 to 6 business continuity objectives. I prefer 3 really good business opportunity objectives. Have one that comes up to your certification, so you can show an auditor, we put this objective in and we've completed it and reached its goal. One that's going to finish not long after your certification, so the auditor can see that you're actually measuring your objective as you've been implementing your management system. And then 1, 6 or 8 months after your management system, that when you go for your first surveillance, they can use that as evidence to say that you've continued with that. Every time you've succeeded in an objective, now you can either renew that and start it again and make a new goal to set it, or just change it for a new objective. But have 3 or 4 on the go throughout the management system's life.
Yeah, before you move on, just to chip in, I think one of the other things as well is Ted and I both align on this, that you should really try, look it up if you're not familiar with it, but Google it. But if you are familiar, using smart objectives, where if you define those objectives as SMART objectives, where they're specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound, then basically you're on the right track, really, as having a decent framework then for monitoring things. And the other thing as well, yes, everything should have an owner, but that also is true of your risks and opportunities and things as well. One thing you don't want to do is document all your risks and have risk treatments and all of those sorts of things, and they're not clearly owned by anyone, because nothing will trip you up in a cert audit quicker than having lots of opportunities and risks identified that are not owned by anybody, therefore they're not effectively tracked and managed. And similar with the objectives, nothing will stall objectives quicker than if you don't have properly assigned owners and ownership of them.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, good catch, Jerry. Thanks. Okay, step 5, support. You need to define the competency levels for staff involved in BCMS. So we said before, you need to identify these staff and their roles, responsibilities, and their authorities. But you also need to understand what is the level of competency that person needs to be in that role. Now, for a small business, you may not have people in the business that have got competency to do this. So you identify where they're lacking, put in place some training, and an auditor will be very happy that you've done that. Of course, you need to document the fact that you've identified the competencies, you've put the training in, and if they're doing the training, some sort of certificate afterwards to say that they've done it. For bigger businesses, it could be a case that you have people there that have got some of the skill sets, but not all of them. Where you have other people in other parts of the business who have got those skill sets, but not part of the BCMS, you could have a mentoring program. Anything that you can help develop the competency skill sets of the people within that management system is the important takeaway from this. Again, this needs to be documented. Just as I said, identify the training, get an individual. He needs this to attain competency for his level within the BCMS. We've identified the training. We put it in our training plan. He's gone for the training. We got a certificate that he's done it. There you go. Training requirements for the support competencies ticked off. And again, an auditor is going to be looking for that. And this is where HR comes into it. HR, although they may not be a part of the management system per se, and they don't fall in the organogram, will be part of it because they will need to, A, make sure that the job descriptions for those people in the management system are reflected of the roles within the BCMS. And also the competency level and competency training, they'll need to map that against the individual to show the auditor the fact that, yeah, we've got him his training, he attended that course, and we've got a copy of his certificate. That way the auditor can quite happily tick those things off. Another big thing is awareness. We mentioned this right at the beginning when we talked about getting buy-in. Awareness is not a one-off thing. It has to be drip-fed throughout the life of the management system. During implementation, it's crucial to maintain awareness and maintain that buy-in from everybody. So you could do this one or two. There's several ways you can do this. You can do group sessions where you get people in from different parts of the business, sit down, give them a presentation to let them know what the business continuity management plan is, why you've implemented it, what benefits there are, what the roles are, where you are on your roadmap, what's going to happen next, what happens after certification. So people are aware of what's happening. You could do it by doing a mail shot once every couple of months, a business continuity mail shot that everybody gets on the last Friday of the month or something like that, where they can read about what's happening, where you are with your implementation, the latest goals, the latest buzzes, whatever it is with it around the BCMS. It's drip feeding the little seeds of awareness of BCM across the business, and it's crucial. And then you need to create a communication plan for the business continuity management system. Within this, you need to be able to identify what needs to be communicated, when it has to be communicated, who it has to be communicated, to whom it needs to be communicated to, what are the process or what's the format of that communication, and finally, who is responsible for that communication. Again, in our toolkit, we have a communication matrix that's already set up, but again, you will define that to how your business continuity management system works. Most of the communication outside will be to clients and suppliers, but it could also be to regulatory bodies, and they'll have specific formats they want their data in. So this is the communication matrix that will tell you that for this communication that's going to this regulatory body, it's got to be in this format. It's got to be done every 6 months. So the next one's in June, and it's got to be done by Fred. That's your communications matrix. Talk about documentation, as we have throughout this so far, it brings us nicely onto this bit, documented information. Prior to 2015, there used to be two types of documents in management system. There used to be documents and there used to be records. They've now been, after 2015, they've now been combined and they're now known as documented information. So everything where you record information, data, processes, procedures, checklists are known as documented information. The standard requires you to have a procedure in place to control your documented information within your management system. Now, I'm working with a company at the moment that have got their own processes and their own references, and they asked me, can we use these references? And I said, yes, of course you can. You don't have to start a new development, a new reference standard if you want. Have it in that, but have something significant in that reference to show it's BCMS, to which they did. But you have to have some form of showing that that document is a reference to something within the BCMS. You've got to have a cradle to grave process for document control. So the development of your document, review of it, your verification, validation, your publishing, your review, your change of that document, your supposition of that document, your archiving, and then eventual destruction of that document. There has to be a process in your management system that covers that for your management system documented information. It doesn't have to be convoluted. It just has to be nice and simple so people follow it. One of the big things that auditors look at in your documentation is whether you're filling in all the boxes that you've got in there, whether the dates within the documents correspond to the dates in the boxes or within your document management system. So if you keep it as simple as possible, only have the information that you desperately need for that document. If you don't need a signature, don't put it on. If you don't need a check every time you do a check, you don't need a date for that. You just need to put a tick in the box. That's enough. An auditor, if you can justify that to an auditor, that's fine. But you have to have something in there for it. And finally, development of BCMS policies and procedures. This comes into its own when we look at Clause 8 operational, because that's where the backbone of this management system is. BCMS policies, we talked about earlier on, should be one overall policy for your BCMS, and that should be documented and then available to people that require it. But your procedures are the procedures that you will be using to mitigate incidents, disruptions. So these are your business continuity plans, your disruption plans, your incident response plans, your training plans, your training report. All of these are the sort of things that come under this area, policies and procedures, and we'll be looking at that next. Documentation, I know it can be a bane. Again, our toolkits have got most of the, every requirement in this management system has been documented within the toolkit. Takes a bit of weight off yourself. If you're doing it yourself, again, use your checklist to make sure that you've got the right thing for the right requirement. Step 7. So now that the planning has been implemented, well, now that we've done all the planning for risks and opportunities, we've done the document information that is required. We'll now look at the implementation of those processes and those actions identified to, first of all, address the risks and opportunities that we identified previously, and also how we're going to mitigate those risks. So we've identified these, and we do that by carrying out a business impact assessment. These, again, depend upon the scope of your management system, can be very intense. If you're going to use a business continuity management system that's going to cover the whole of the management, whole of the organization, your BIA is going to be quite big. If it's going to be for, say, for your IT systems, your crown jewel IT systems, your critical systems, it may not be so big. So you've got to think about this again, going back to what we said about your scope. You've got to think about what's going to be in your scope, because it does have an impact when you come to your operational side, and it does impact your BIA and the amount of work and effort you're going to put into your BIA. A BIA is a work in itself. It's probably one of the biggest chunks of work within the business management system, and it's not a one-off piece of work. It is a living document. It has to be reviewed on a 6 monthly to an annual basis to check that what's in place hasn't changed, that the documentation you have for your business continuity plans, etc., are still viable, that the risks to those critical systems or critical areas of the business haven't been changed. They may have been changed for the better. Your mitigations that you've put in place have actually borne fruition, and they've moved down your criticality list. That's going to affect your BIA. So it is all interlinked, and your BIA is not just a one-off thing. The first one is going to take a lot of time. The second one, the third one, the fifth one, the 200th one, not so much time, because it's a review of what's in there and a review of what's happening around the business at that time. So within the BIA, you're going to define the types of impact and the relevant criteria for the business of those impacts. You're going to identify and prioritize critical activities and either products and services required to maintain them. You're going to be looking at the you're going to assess the impact of the disruptive incidents over a time period against relevant critical activities. So how long can that incident happen, that disruption happen, before it starts hurting the business? That's going to give you a couple of criteria to think about. You need to be you'll be able to refine the point in time when non-resumption of these critical activities are going to have a major impact. We call this the maximum tolerable period of disruption, the MTPD. The amount of time that you can survive with that disruption before it hurts. This is critical within your BIA because you need this for developing documents later on. You'll also identify the time when resumption of critical activities are to resume and at what acceptable level. This is known as the recovery time objective, the RTO. You may be able to recover a system to 50%, which is enough to keep going and not get to that hurt point. So you may not have to recover 100% of systems to have a mitigation enough for you not to hurt so much, and therefore take some of the pressure off that MTPD to get the system back up to 100%. That's an important measurement within the BCMS. You'll be able to identify the resources necessary to support those prioritized critical activities. Who do you need and what do you need if this disruption happens? Who's going to be responsible? So you need your IRT people. So there's a resource. What resource are they going to need? Have we got mirrors systems? Have we got backups? Have we got CPUs in place? Do we have an alternative system we can change over to? All of these are identified within the BIA for each individual disruption and each individual system or business unit. And the big one for IT, and this is the one that a lot of companies have fallen over in the past, is looking at the interdependencies internally and externally. If you've got a system that is supplying information or data to another system that then supplies an output to something else, if that first system goes, goes down, then there's going to be an impact further on down. You're going to get a domino effect. It may not happen straight away, It may happen after an hour, after 2 hours, maybe after a day. You don't know. But within your BIA, you have to go down that path to work it out, because your MTPD, your maximum tolerable period of disruption, could suddenly go from maybe half a day to 3 days, because you've not just got one system, you've now got 3 systems. And your third system is the one that's going to drive your maximum your maximum time period of disruption. So interdependencies, crucial nowadays when you're looking at your BIA. Once you've done that, and you've taken a couple of hours off and lay down in a dark room for a few hours with a damp blanket over you, you can start thinking about your strategies and solutions. Strategies and solutions are the inter document between your BIA and your BCPs. This is where you look at your output from your BIA and say, right, these are the critical systems, these are critical units. These are the potential disruptions. We've worked out our MTPD and the RTO and the RPO for it. What are our solutions? What can we put in place to do that? Well, it may be a case, right, we need to have a backup system for that, because that is just super critical. There's so many interdependencies on that. We can't have it go down for more than 10, 15 minutes. There has to be a mirror system ready to go. We've got to have something on the cloud that we can just download straight away onto a separate server to kick off and do that. Those are the solutions. They're not expanded. They're just bullet point solutions for each of the disruptions. Once you have your solutions, you can then start to identify your business continuity plans, your disaster recovery plans for your IT systems, and your incident response plans for the lesser incidents. This is where you now look at all of the resources you've decided you need to mitigate this. It's going to be documented this. You're going to have a flow diagram of when the incident starts, all the way through to when the incident has been fully recovered and is back to normal working. So the incident response team will be able to pick up this BCP or a DRP, or whichever one it is, open the first page, flow diagram to see what he's got to do, follow it down. And for those that aren't familiar with it, be able to turn it over. There's a table of all the steps and a bit more details, a couple of annex with their checklists and the call lists and things like that. And off they go and they fight the fire, they fight the incident, fight the disruption. BCPs need to be clear, precise, and simple. Don't have, as myself and Jerry have seen recently, a BCP that is 38 pages long and doesn't actually help the person who's trying to fight the disruption. BCPs are specific, DRPs are specific to that disruption. So they should be designed just for that. Don't need all the niceties up front. It's a working document. And again, it has to be documented, it has to be reviewed, and it has to be tested. So yeah. BCPs are your outcome of your BIA. Go ahead, Jerry. Sorry, mate.
No, that's right. I'm just going to say, avoid going on to Google. You know, I've seen so many times, haven't we, Ted, where people think, oh, what goes in a BCP, and the resistance, you know, your fingers want to do the typing, and you know, you go on Google and you get examples of BCPs, but the danger is lots of BCPs are a very personal thing to a business. They have to be written around what's important to you, what are you protecting, what assets need to be recovered, what order they need to be recovered, you know, and how do you get your business up. Now, how you do that is very business specific. So there's no one size fits all. You can go on there and Google a template and get it. There's the temptation, and we've seen this quite recently, where you know, you end up trying to implement a continuity plan or a model that fits a much larger organization with much more complex needs than your own, and so you end up with an overcomplicated plan that in reality would be, you know, unworkable and we've seen this time and time again. So I think the what's the acronym? Keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah.
Is the way to go with this. Don't overcomplicate your business continuity plans. Don't sort of resist that temptation to try and base it on something you've found off Google or the internet, because it has to be very specific to the systems you have, the dependencies of those systems, and the way in which you work. And it has to be meaningful and easy to follow, in order that people know what they're doing, how to recover, and carry on in the event of the heat of a situation, where you're in a continuity situation. So that's probably both of our advice really on this one.
Yeah, that's a big takeaway for this. And then finally, you've got to exercise it. It's no good writing a plan and then waiting for the disruption. And when the disruption happens, you open your plan and you get halfway down and you find out, oh, that doesn't quite work. It has to be exercised. So the standard requires you to have an exercise program documented, and for you to show evidence that you have exercised your BCPs, DRPs, IRPs, whatever it is, etc., etc. Performance review. This is an important step before certification. There's a couple of ticks that you have to have in place before you go for certification. You have to establish an internal audit program. Now, some companies, big companies, do it themselves. Some smaller companies outsource this. It's something we do for companies. It's entirely up to you how you do it. But you have to have an audit program that an auditor can view to see that you are auditing the business continuity management system against the requirements of the standard across initially 12 months. So you're going to have an audit probably once a month, once every 6 weeks for the year. And within each of those audits, you're looking at separate areas of the standard to make sure that you comply with the requirements of that. And you have to have it documented. And outcomes of the audits could be observations or non-conformities. So you have to have a way of documenting non-conformities and observations. And you also have to have a report to say that you've done the audit. This is what we found. These are the non-conformities, and these are the action plans going forward. So you have to have all of that in place. Again, the toolkit has all of this. You need to review your objectives. As we said when we were talking about our objectives, people, especially when things are happening and there's lots happening when you're implementing the management system, you can't lose sight of your objectives, which is why it's important to give them an owner, so they are always responsible for looking after those objectives. And then it's a case of whoever's running the implementation grabbing hold of the person and saying, right, how's the objectives doing? How's that objectives doing? Where are we with that one? Make sure that they're up to date and the necessary information is being recorded for the reviewing for the auditor. You have to perform a management review meeting. Now, the standard goes through the 9.3 of the standard is the management review, and it gives you a list of what you have to include within your management review meeting. And it's quite specific. So you don't have to second guess this, but you do have to document what came out of the management review meeting. And it has to be chaired by the top man, by the CEO or the MD. And if they're off playing golf for a good reason, it has to be one of their deputized directors. It has to be one of those because it's one of their responsibilities. It's part of their responsibilities. And this is the period, and this is the chance for them to find out exactly what's happening in their management system. This is where they are presented with the information on what's happening with our internal and external issues, our interested parties, with our risks and opportunities, have we had any disruptions, what's happened with them, any action plans that come out of it, how our exercise program's going, have we got the right resources? This is the perfect place to ask for more resources because you've got their attention. What do we need for the future? Discuss any changes to the business that might implement the impact the management system. All of this is contained in the management review, and it has to be documented. And out of all that, if there's any actions that come across, any NC actions outstanding, any opportunity actions outstanding, this is the time to document your action plans and to take them and to do them, implement them. Almost there. The last thing you're going to do really is look back at your gap assessment and see what's there and what hasn't been covered. And hopefully, if you've followed it through properly and you've been using your gap assessment and your project plan to tick off what you've been doing, there shouldn't be any gaps. Any outstanding actions, make sure they're still being progressed. Any actions that haven't been started, get them started. Make sure when you get them started, it's documented and who is responsible, and it's time bound. Update your implementation plan. You should be doing this as you're going through your implementation anyway, but this is a good chance to sit back and then have a look at it and say, right, oh, we've done that, haven't we? Have a quick check, tick it off. Don't forget your implementation plan is going to be a lot more granular than your gap assessment. So it's going to be a bit more requirement specific, and they'll help you making sure. And then perform your document review. Look at all your mandatory procedures. Look at your risks identified and mitigating actions. Look at your BCMS documents issued and approved. Please, please, please don't have any draft documents when you go for certification. This is the time to wipe these clean. If they haven't been approved, stick them under the nose of the person who's required to approve them and tell them that it has to be expedited. It has to be done because you've got a deadline to do. Make sure your BCPs and your DRPs are published and distributed. One thing I have seen in the past, actually with an airport, all of their BCPs and DRPs were in one office. Unfortunately, there was an incident the other side of the airfield, and they didn't have a copy of the BCP, and they had to go all the way back to get the copy of the BCP. They can come back to it, by which time the incident escalated. So when you distribute them to the right place. If you're doing DRPs, most of them are going to be sat within the IT area. If you're doing business unit BCPs, make sure the relevant BCP is in the relevant business unit. Have a full copy of all of the BCPs and DRPs and your policies and all that in a folder with separators so they're easy to identify in the business manager's office or whoever's going to be running the business continuity management. But make sure the relevant BCPs and DRPs are at the relevant areas. Really important. Make sure your exercise program has been documented, it's been established, it's being used. So there's evidence that you're running exercises. You don't have to run full-blooded exercises. They're costly and take a lot of time. You can run tabletop exercises. Get everybody who's involved in that BCP around the table and talk through the steps. Again, when you've done that, work on a lessons learned from it, make any changes that come out of it, reissue the document, make sure it's been signed off, reissue it, make sure it's distributed properly and the old one's been put away and thrown away and destroyed, and then write the report up on it. Seems like a lot, but this actually goes really quickly. You'd be really surprised at this point. Then you need to think about your certification. Well, you've probably been thinking about your certification about halfway through implementation. You'll be looking at what cert bodies are out there. Choose a cert body carefully. Look at certification bodies that deal with people in your industry. So there's a good chance they're going to have industry experts in those management systems that will be aligned to what you're doing. Not every RCB has industry experts, so be careful how you do that. Talk to lots of them and get quotes. Get costs because they vary widely. And the cheapest is not necessarily the worst, and the expensive expensive ones are not necessarily the best. But think about your budget. Think about, do they cover our industry? So they should have a good idea what we're doing. Look at the cost, and also bear in mind that that cost is a 3-year cost. The cycle for certification is that you do your certification, and we'll talk about that in a sec. Then a year later, you do your first surveillance certification. A year after that, you do a second surveillance certification. And then on the 3rd year, you start with a recertification. So you're looking at a 3-year costing. So think about that. Perform baseline audits and assessments to establish readiness. Now, you can outsource this. This is something we get asked to do a lot of. We do pre-certification audits. Other people do them. You can do them themselves. You need to audit the whole system. This is the difference between an internal audit and the pre-cert audit. An internal audit is only looking at parts of the system, and they have a deep dive in those parts. A pre-certification audit looks at the whole system overall and looks for mistakes in that whole system, looks at the interaction of things within the whole system. It's a good idea to have one before certification because it gives you the confidence that you've got everything in place, that you've got all the documentation, that all the documents have been signed off, published, etc. Everybody knows where the DRPs, the BCPs are, that your exercise schedule is up to date, and you're fairly confident that you are ready for your certification. That's you preparing for your audit. The next thing you need to do is to think about what is your audit. Now, your audit comes in 2 parts. Stage 1 is documentation, and stage 2 is the actual audit itself. Stage 1, the auditor will normally take a day or 2 days, and he will ask you for copies of X amount of documents that pertain to your management system. And he'll be looking through those to see that you've documented the relevant areas that are mandatory, that your documents are all in the same format, that all the boxes that have got requirements in there, like, the document owner, the date of publication, they're all in there, that they actually read right, that there's no errors. If that comes back fine, and it should do, they'll give you a date, a preliminary date for your second stage. Nowadays, that comes in 2 forms. It comes in the forms that somebody rocks up to your organization, 1 or 2 people, and they do a physical audit, sit down in an office, or then audit you, have a walk around your organization to check things, come back to the office, do some more interviews, do an end report, do an end meeting to tell you, where it's gone wrong, where it's gone right, and to say whether you have or you haven't got your certification. Or they do it remotely, which is exactly the same. They set dates up for your remote viewing. They'll send you the times and dates, the dates and the times within those dates of the audit schedule, who they want to talk to, what they're going to be talking about, time for breaks, time for the opening meeting, time for the closing meeting. It might be done over 2 days. And then they'll go away and do a report. At the end of both audits, they will tell you if they're going to recommend you for a certificate or if they're not going to recommend you for the certificate. Now, the second one is not a deal breaker. It could come with a caveat. We're going to give you a certificate, but we're going to hold off for 3 months because you've got some of these things that we want you to clear off. If you can clear off and give them evidence within that 3 months, you will get your certificate without being re-audited. If it's a case that they turn around and say, actually, there's a few major non-conformities here that you have to get sorted, get them sorted. When you're ready, give us a call and we'll come back and re-audit you. There's a cost implication there because they'll do another full audit. So make sure your pre-cert audit captures everything. So when you come for your audit, you're ready for it. So if you follow those 10 steps, you should be in a good shape to achieve your certification. And like I said, throughout, we've got toolkits for this, and they'll give you a head start. All the key documents are already in there. All the generic information's in there. There are areas in the document that you have to put your own information in, and it's highlighted for you to make these documents your own. A little bit about what we can provide. Like I said, we do toolkits. We do 9, 14, 45, 22301, 27001. We also do GDPR, Cyber Essentials. All the documents come ready to go. All you've got to do is put your information in there. All the documents are customizable. We can put your logos on. Within each of the documents, there are lots of name holder places for your business's name, and we can populate those all in one go, and that's a small charge to get that done. We are providing ISO consultancy now, not just on document support, but we're providing consultancy on implementation. That can be full implementation where we help from start to finish, or it can be dipping in and out and asking us as you go through implementation for guidance on documents, on processes, or what sort of things you should be looking for, etc. So we do that. We also do internal auditing and pre-certification audits. We do second-party audits where we can act as your internal auditing body. And we would then fulfill your internal audit needs to your schedule, not our schedule, but we can help you with your schedule. Or we can just do a full pre-cert for you. Okay, guys, really enjoyed giving this webinar to you. Thanks very much for your time and your attendance. All of you take care and have a good night.